Good afternoon and evening, everyone. Thank you very much for turning up. This is our first event of the year, and you might have seen we've had a slight rebrand at BSV Wales this year. And we've also refreshed the format for the year's events as well. So we'll be doing 4 events roughly quarterly. So this is our Q1 event for this for 2021. And today's event is all focusing on Bitcoin and data, as I'm sure you'll have seen. So we're going to look at lots of different views. And again, when we say Bitcoin and data, we're really talking about use of public blockchains in particular in general. So obviously at BSV Wales, we like to welcome lots of external opinion as well, and kind of get a broader view of the space and kind of different ideas as to what's going on. So we're going to hear some really interesting talks today that might expand the horizons a little bit for us all. And just to let you know, so we are running a giveaway very kindly, thanks to Bitcoin Association for helping sponsor. So in order to enter, we're going to be giving away £25 in BSV to 2 of our attendees. And to enter for that prize draw, all you need to do is join the BSV Meetup page. And if you see at the top of the screen, there should be a link that says sign up here, where you can just click that to go to the page. So what you need to do is you need to join the BSV Wales Meetup page there and click going on the event. And then you need to just post a comment on the event with your Handcash handle. So if you haven't got a Handcash app, then you can find that from any of your app stores. Just search Handcash and then post your handle on there. And then we'll have 2 giveaways, one after the first, each of the first 2 talks. So yeah, that's just something to bear in mind in the background. And if you're interested in starting to use, and we will also ping anyone who's attending with gives us a handle. We'll also ping a few pennies around as well, so you can practice using some of the new applications that have been built recently on BSV. But without further ado, I'd like to just give you an idea of the itinerary for today. So we have 3 really interesting talks on kind of different aspects of the use of Bitcoin and blockchain for data, and in particularly the use of public blockchain for data. So the first talk from Dr. Hossein Jahanshahloo. This is about Cardiff University Bitcoin database, which is a really useful insight into the power of using this kind of public ledger and looking at the actual data on chain for analytics purposes and research. Then we have a talk from Dr. Imtiaz from Cardiff Metropolitan University. He's talking about public services and trying to increase operational efficiency using blockchain, and then some very novel ways of attacking that with different tech stack. But I'll leave it to him later to explain more about that, but it's going to be very interesting, I'm sure. And then finally, we have a talk from George Samuels, who is going to talk about one of the, for any of those who are familiar with BSV recently, one of the most interesting projects I think that's going on with Tuvalu, and how there's a very large project to do with the National Digital Ledger there. So George is going to give us some background about that, and then we're going to have a Q&A session with all the participants at the end. So throughout the 3 talks, please feel free to submit questions in the question function at the bottom, and we'll make sure they get through to the presenters. So feel free to ask open questions or directed questions, and we'll make sure that they get asked at the end. And just small housekeeping note, we will be recording this session for your awareness. So hopefully we'll be able to distribute that later as well. But yeah, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Hossein Jahanshahloo, and he's going to talk about Cardiff University Bitcoin database. So please welcome Hossein, and you can take it away. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jack, and thank you very much, Laura and Bitcoin Association for inviting me today. Today I'm going to talk about Cardiff University Bitcoin database. As Jack introduced me, my name is Hossein, and I'm a lecturer in Cardiff University Business School in Accounting and Finance Department. So in today's talk, I'm going to talk about where the idea of CUBiD came from, what gap it fills in the market and especially in the industry, what are the data included in CUBiD. So I'm going to use CUBiD many times from now on. So it's Cardiff University Bitcoin database. And most importantly, I'm going to talk about the applications of CUBiD and the current research projects that I'm involved with and some of my other colleagues are working on by using CUBiD. So as majority of you know, Bitcoin or majority of cryptocurrencies are a set of transactions that cryptographically are linked together. That is the reason we call them blockchains. So each block includes a set of transactions, and then these blocks are also chained together cryptographically. So this gives us a lot of opportunity and a golden wealth of data that did not exist before to work with. So technically you have access to all the data and transaction in an economy. Technically, if you assume the Bitcoin network is like an economy, you have access to all the transactions. So such a data is a gold mine to work with. It's a dream to have before. And the good thing about Bitcoin data is that it is publicly available. However, if you want to work with this data, usually you would be able, in the best case scenario, you would be able to find a JSON format data in a form like this. But if you want a structured data, which is what we academics like to use, a structured data like this, you wouldn't be able to find such a data. So when I saw this gap in the market, I created Cardiff University Bitcoin Database, or CUBiD. So let's go back to very basic of the CUBiD or the Bitcoin transaction level and explain what it is and how CUBiD utilizes the data in Bitcoin network. So let's give an example. Let's assume that I receive £1,000 salary from Cardiff University, and I go to Costco and I spend £200 there. Whenever my pub opens, I will go there, spend £50 there. I will go and spend £50 in a shop, in a supermarket, and I will spend £100 on my car and £600 on my mortgage. So by looking at this, because all of these transactions are recorded in the network, you can see that how much money I have at each point in time, when I'm getting my salary, when I'm spending money in Costco, and you will have an overall overview of what I'm doing here. But by looking at this, you can also have another view. If you look at a bigger picture, I'm not the only one who goes to Costco. There are other people who go to Costco as well. So you can, by having the data like what we have in a Bitcoin network, you can have a look and you can see who exactly has how much money at each point in time and who is spending how much money there, considering that Bitcoin is used as a currency. I'm not going to go to the discussion whether it is a currency or not. So you can see by looking at, this is one individual person. When you bring the data from different people, you can have a better picture about another entity. And if you look completely from zoom out, you can see such a thing. So this set of transactions and the data that is available in Bitcoin would allow you to have a complete overview of what is going on where, who has how much money, where the money comes from, where the money goes to. Why is it important? That's the whole the main reason of this talk. We will go through it. So what do I do? In CUBiD, I come and divide the data in Bitcoin network into 3 sections. The first section, or the first table, is the block data. When you go to that table, you can see the block number, the block hash, and many information like what is the block reward for that block, how many transaction was included in that block, what was the total input, so the numbers here are in Satoshi, what was the total input in the transactions of that block, and what was the total output, and how much was the transaction fee that was rewarded to the miner of that block, and at what time and at what day that block was mined. Then we go a level deeper. Then we go to the transaction data. In a transaction data, you can see which block this transaction hash or transaction number is included in, at what time it was submitted to the mempool, what was the lock time there. I'm not going to go to the detail of some of these fields, whether this transaction was the Coinbase transaction, and how much was the total input of this transaction, how much was the total output of this transaction, and how much fee the person who submitted this transaction has paid, and how many input address and output address this transaction has, and some other information as well. And then we go to the most detailed transaction level, and that is that for each transaction, you would know who is the sender of the fund, how much they are sending, and who are the receivers of the Bitcoin and how much they are receiving. So by having access to these three levels of data, not only we can look at the graph that I showed you, not only we can have this picture, we also can do much, much more. Because working with this data, working with this amount of data is not very easy, what I have created is that I have created extra layers on top of the core layer that I just showed you. So the three tables that I showed you are the blocks, transactions, and transaction details. On top of that, I have created another two layers in order to facilitate the use of this data by the people who either don't have the ability or don't have the time to process this amount of data by themselves. So for example, I'm not going to go through all the tables, but they are quite similar. I'm going to go through some of them. So for example, if you remember at the beginning, I said we can have such a data. So by one of the tables that we have is address balance by block. When you look at this table, you can see for each address, how much that address has received fund or sent fund. So if it's a positive number, it is receiving. If it's negative, it's sending. How much funds that address receive at each block number. And remember, a block number can be linked to a date and time. And what is the balance of that address after each of these transactions? So this table would give us an opportunity to see how much is the balance of each address at each point in time. But at the same time, we can also do this for a wallet level. I'm not going to go to the detail. If you want, we can talk about it later on. But one advantage that we have is that by using union find algorithm, you can link the addresses that they belong or controlled by the same entity together and get a better picture. So an entity could have 2, 3, 4, or even 2 million addresses at the same time. So what we do is that I come and create this table and link the entities that belong to link the addresses that belong to the same entity and create such an address. So for example, in this table, if you look at these three addresses individually, you would see they are receiving money, sending money, receiving money, sending money, receiving money, sending money. They seem completely independent from each other and they have nothing to do with each other. But when I look at the transactions, I can tell you these three addresses are controlled by the same entity. And when you look at their balance by block, when you know they are the same entity, you can see they are receiving money, receiving money, receiving money, and then suddenly selling all of it at the same time. So if you're looking, for example, at the price formation, you can see the implication of the previous system of this data is very different than the implication of this data. So as I told you, there are other information that we can provide. So for example, by looking at each address, I provide what is the overall activity of the address. So you will have an overall information about the address. So for example, for this address, you would know what is the block number of this address. Sorry, how many blocks it has been active. What was the first block that this address was active in? What was the last block that this address was active in? The number of transactions, which one was the first block that this address received money, and which was the last one that is sent money, and all of these information. Someone might ask, why are these important? So for example, by using this data that is here, we are working with some of our colleagues in another university and also in an American university to identify the suspicious activities of some of the addresses that they are involved in suspicious activities, simply by just using these information here. Or for example, by using simply just the information that is here, we can identify which addresses are more informed and have advantageous information about the price of Bitcoin relative to the other addresses. Or for example, we can do the same thing for a wallet. So as I told you, a wallet is a set of addresses. So when you put all of these addresses together, you can see, for example, this wallet has 372,753 addresses in it. And again, there are so many information about it here. For example, we know that this address has sent 6.39 million Bitcoins and has received the same amount of Bitcoin. And at the moment, it has 98 Bitcoin available in it. So someone might say, so what? Why is it important? The thing is, if you look at this, it's not that much of an interesting story. But if I tell you that this wallet belongs to Silk Road, the illegal marketplace, then that would be an interesting story. Then you would know, okay, that is how much Silk Road had activity. So just by looking at this level of data and combining with the lower level of data, you can see how an illegal site has been active throughout the time. There are many academic studies that have tried to do this and have done a similar study. So by having this data, we can allow the regulators or authorities to come and observe different entities. How we identify these addresses and these wallets that they belong to Silk Road, that's a different story that due to time, I'm not going to go to details. So if I want to just give you an overview of the data in CUBiD, as of Sunday, 28th, there were more than 667,000 blocks in CUBiD, more than 610 million transactions, 2.3 billion transaction details, and more than 770 million addresses in CUBiD. So the question is right now, what are the applications for CUBiD? I mentioned some of the applications, but right now I'm going to go to more detail about the applications of CUBiD. So the applications are in research, teaching, regulatory and legal applications, and trading. For example, regarding research, I'm working with two of my colleagues, Dr. Irisberger from Durham University and Dr. Erkar from Reading University. We are working on a paper that for the first time we are looking at the detailed activities of the Bitcoin, and we call this paper literally Bitcoin under the microscope. So for example, here you can see the number of new addresses, the average number of new addresses per 1,000 block, and you can see throughout the time the number of new addresses is highly correlated with the price of Bitcoin. So it shows when the price of Bitcoin increases that it is accompanied by the increase in the new addresses, which means more and more people are entering to the market and buying Bitcoin. The other thing that, for example, you can have a look at, this is the different categories of addresses and the amount of Bitcoin that they hold. So for example, category 3 is for the addresses that hold between 10 and 100 Bitcoins. 10 and 100 Bitcoins, which means it is between $500,000 to $5 million. What you can see here is that throughout the time, majority of the Bitcoin is held by the people who have between 10 to 100 Bitcoins. And interestingly, unlike what we thought before, the people who hold between 0 and 1 Bitcoin or 1 and 10 Bitcoin, they have the least amount of Bitcoin in total. So what it shows is that the Bitcoin is held and controlled by the people who have at least more than 10 Bitcoin in their wallets. One of the other things that you can, for example, in research, we are looking at it right now is this. So for example, the question is, everyone is talking about the price of Bitcoin and everyone is saying there is at the moment close to 19 million Bitcoin in circulation. The answer is no, it is not. Because for example, you can see there has been around 0.5 million Bitcoins that has not been in circulation since 2014. If something hasn't moved for the last 7 years, there is a good estimation that this Bitcoin is lost. Or for example, you can see that since 2014, 3 million out of 19 million Bitcoin in circulation, 3 million Bitcoins have been sent to the addresses that they have never had any sent activities. So these addresses are receiving only addresses. So 3 million Bitcoins have never been sent from the addresses that they have landed in from 2014 and before. So these all have implications for Bitcoin pricing if we want to understand the behavior of the Bitcoin price and much, much, much more. The other areas that we can use CUBiD and overall the Bitcoin network data to work with is anti-money laundering and knowing your customer, tax implication, legal implication, regulation design and testing those regulation, asset pricing, cryptocurrency design, and much more, like cryptocurrencies, central bank cryptocurrencies or central bank digital currencies, and much more. So I'm going to go to two examples, and then I'm going to hand over. So the first thing is that regarding the anti-money laundering and knowing your customer, as of 2019, $829 million in Bitcoin has been spent on the dark web. That is really worrying. And the other thing is that not all the exchanges are really listening and doing what they can regarding AML and KYC. In 2019, $2.8 billion was laundered by criminal entities in Bitcoin exchanges. And in recent year, especially in the last 4 or 5 months, increasing the price of Bitcoin has made it easier to launder more significant amount of money. So what can we do? So by using a database like CUBiD, you can see, you remember the graph that I showed you, you can see where the money comes from and where the money goes to. So for example, if you're a bank or you're a customer who wants to use this Bitcoin that is in this address, if you go to your bank and say, I have this Bitcoin, the bank can use the CUBiD and design their own algorithm as well to understand, oh, the Bitcoin that you're trying to give me is coming from a dark market. So this is not really a clean money. Or for example, I don't know if you remember last year, there was an NHS, there was a hack or an attack on NHS, that there was a WannaCry attack on NHS. So you can see on one of the addresses that they used was this address. You can see this address received around 20 Bitcoin from its victims. And this address, when it received the 20 Bitcoins, tried to hide it. One of the projects that we are working on right now is to develop an algorithm to trace these money. You see, this address received this 20 Bitcoin, and in order to lose the track of money, they are sending these money to different addresses to hide their track. And we're developing an algorithm to identify this money, and as soon as they want to launder this money, stop and prevent these activities. Or for example, there was a Department of Justice in the US was able to identify terrorist financing activities for ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that they were trying to use this Bitcoin address. Obviously, I've blocked some of it. They were trying to use this Bitcoin address to raise funds. They did raise funds, but DOJ was able to identify the people behind it and block the fund. Or for example, it has also tax implication. You remember I told you one of the activities that we do is that we identify the addresses that belong to the same entity. Imagine someone goes to HMRC and says, look, I have done some trading on Bitcoin and I made $2 loss. So technically, I don't need to pay any tax on it. But if you use our data, you will see, no, the person who controls these two addresses also controls these addresses. And not only the person did not make $2 loss, the person also made $20 profit. So we are not accusing anyone here, but it seems the person misrepresented his income and as a result should pay more tax. The other applications in this regard are legal implications. So CUBiD and overall the data that is there, that is collected and existing CUBiD, can be used to settle dispute over transactions or trace a stolen Bitcoin, or can be used because the records are tamper-proof in Bitcoin network, they can be accepted in any court. However, that's a theoretical discussion. I'm not a lawyer and I cannot go to it in more detail. Obviously, due to the lack of time, I cannot go to all the detail of the CUBiD. What I recommend you is that go to CUBiD website. I will show you the address in the next slide. And on the right-hand side of the website, you can see the document and the user manual of the CUBiD. And in that user's manual, you can see all the details and the fields and the tables that exist in CUBiD, and how you can also use and access CUBiD. I would be happy to answer any question. This is CUBiD's email that would be answered either by me or one of my team members. This is my Twitter's handle. This is CUBiD's website, cardiff.ac.uk/CUBiD. And this is the CUBiD's Twitter handle. Thank you very much again for the time and the opportunity, Jack and Laura and Bitcoin Association. I hand it over to Jack. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Hossein. Really interesting talk. We've actually had some really good questions come in already, which I think we'll save to the roundtable at the end. But yeah, please keep them coming. And I believe make sure if you do have a question to submit them as a question. So if you look at the chat box, you can have the option to submit as either a chat comment or a question, which helps us to show that to the audience as well when we ask it. So yeah, please keep those coming. Really good stuff so far. And thanks again, Hossein, for that really insightful talk. So as I mentioned at the start, we do have a running giveaway as we go through the event, and I'm pleased to announce we've just done the draw for the first round of this. So the first £25 prize is going to the handle Aquaman. So well done, not only on getting a very nice handle, but also for winning that £25 prize. Just a reminder, you can enter for the second round of this, so another £25 prize will be given at the end of the next talk. Just go to the BSV Wales Meetup page, which you can see the link at the top of your screen, hopefully, and the sign up button. If you go on there, then you can you need to sign up on the page and then leave us a comment with your handle. So there's plenty of you here, I'm sure, who would like to get some free BSV to play around with. So I do encourage you to have a go. And anyone who submits a handle will also ping a few pennies around for later, so you can practice using some of the BSV apps we've seen develop recently. But while you may be doing that, we have our next talk, which is really one I'm very excited to announce, and that's from Dr. Imtiaz Khan, who's coming from Cardiff Metropolitan University, and is going to talk about something especially close to my heart, is the use of blockchain for public services and kind of improving outcomes. And I believe this is some research done by him and some colleagues, including Ali Shahaab, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today. But without further ado, I'm going to give it away to Dr. Imtiaz Khan to talk you through his research and his findings. So Imtiaz, if you'd like to switch on your camera and mic and talk us through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack, Laura, and Bitcoin SV for giving us the opportunity to present our research. So yes, I'm Dr. Imtiaz Khan. I'm a reader in data science at Cardiff Metropolitan University, and this Ali Shahaab, actually this work is his, but he's busy with class today, and that's why he can present it. I'm presenting, I'm his supervisor, but I'm presenting on his behalf. So basically our approach was this PhD studentship is with Companies House, which is the largest, the government executive agency for registering all the companies register and information across UK. So how we are kind of increase their operational efficiency using blockchain technology. So that's the motivation for this research. So we started with kind of like exploring or kind of reviewing what's the kind of area, what's the kind of current situation in public services, in terms of trust, in terms of interoperability, in other issues, and how whether they actually need blockchain or not. That kind of review and stuff like that we did at the very beginning, and we published this paper in this British Blockchain Association journal as well as IEEE Access, where we published like what are the consensus protocol that are applicable for public sector as well as private sector, and that kind of review and analysis. And in terms of like when you talk about public service, obviously different countries are exploring and different countries are also implementing and using, and we'll hear about the talk after this. But Estonia might be the most advanced nation in terms of using blockchain technology and kind of digital technology in a whole. So their public service using like 99% of their public services based on digital infrastructure. So everything there is digital, and they claim that they save around like 1,400 years of working hour every year, like that is 2% of the GDP every year annually. So that's a huge operational efficiency in terms of money, in terms of public service, and etc. And we published a paper article in primarily in Conversation, and then it went to other outlets about Estonia, how it can become a digital republic. And especially this article was published just before the US election. And whether you know that in Estonia, they can vote, citizens can vote during the voting season, I mean, as much as they can like. And each time they vote through their mobile, the previous vote will be cancelled. So they can vote and up till the deadline, and the final vote is counted and things like that. So it created a huge kind of like a sensation. This, I mean, many people didn't know, and it was just before the US election, and Donald Trump was asking about this mail-in vote and stuff like that. So yeah, it was interesting. But Estonia had the benefit because after the fall of Soviet Union, I mean, they had a clean slate, so they can. I mean, they choose obviously the right pathway to make them digital and everything. But in other countries, like especially in UK and other nations, I mean, you have to deal with the old system. I mean, you cannot wipe up everything and kind of start new. So that's why we are thinking that how you can kind of like what are the challenges, operation challenges that you face. So we take 3 public sector organizations, so Companies House, HMRC, and land registry. So and we find that the challenges are like what they do is that they collect the data from the citizen, and they archive the data, and they ensure the integrity and the security of the data. And they publish or they disseminate the data through their web front. Part of the data, whatever their kind of policy defined them to publish. So, and there are some interoperability across different agencies, but they do it like through data dump. But when you do the data dump, they have different challenges. Say, for example, standardization is data is formatted in different standards, and there are even unit incompatibility across different agencies and stuff like that. And that needs to go through different transformation, cleaning, and etc., etc. And from that process, it's not only time consuming, but also there is a room for error and mistakes and things like that. So it basically lose the quality of the data. So what we kind of think another approach is that another problem with that is that, I mean, if you go to say Companies House as a new company and you register a new company, it says that you have to go to HMRC to fill up your data. It asks the citizen basically, and same with HMRC. They ask that you have to fill up the relevant information to Companies House. So it is the responsibility of the citizen to fill up the data and things like that. So that is obviously, there is people may forget to update. There's a room for error, and some people do give misinformation for various reasons. Say, for example, turnover. So people always kind of inflate, not always, I mean, some companies do inflate their turnover in Companies House, or kind of like give whatever in HMRC for various reasons. And there is also data inconsistency and things like that. And another problem is that how do you track fraudulence activities? In fraudulence means there's a bill, still it is a bill form, it is not even a law still now, that they want to track the actual company owner, the owner of a company, that are buying houses in London area, especially the mansion houses and stuff like that. With current database system, because it's override the previous information and it's difficult to link what are the company's actual company or what is the subsidiary, shell companies, shells of shells, and things like that. So it's hard to track because the provenance information, linking the provenance information with current database system is difficult. So how do you change the system basically? So if you go, say, for example, I mean, from company approach like this paper from IBM, they're saying that not paper, blog from IBM, they're saying that you have to become smart and things like that. But which we think, I mean, may not work for public service or any organization. So if you cannot ask people to be smart, or you cannot, I mean, kind of part of their existing system, and also you do not basically you don't want to get involved with the union. If you say that you need to get training and some people will lose job and due to this transformation, etc., then it will be very much challenging for you. So what we need to do is that we need to solve the first interoperability issue, and then we have to solve this once only principle. We discussed that where we showed that land registry asks you to go to form HMRC asks you to go to company's house, and company's house asks the citizen to go to fill up the information to HMRC and things like that. But once only principle said that the citizen has to fill up their information into one organization, and the other organization will in-sync the information automatically. And the second, the final thing is this: solve the provenance issue so that we can detect fraudulent activity. So what we did is that we introduced a kind of like a public-private blockchain network layer on top of current existing data management system they have. So we do not want to part up anything with the current culture as well as with current database system. So this CUBiD system, this private blockchain framework platform, enables you to talk to kind of node to node. It doesn't broadcast the whole network. So that, because this is important, because land registry is kind of interested with certain attributes like address or incorporation ID or dissolution ID and something of a company. Whereas HMRC is also interested with turnover and etc. etc. So there are some overlaps and some are, I mean, disjointed attribute that are interest for different public service organizations. So this is how it works. I mean, this is a kind of like a public-private blockchain layer. So what we do is that the information are held, I mean, connected. This private blockchain is connected with the existing native database as well as with the public blockchain, Ethereum. And the data we only keep the metadata in the public blockchain to keep its integrity or immutability, whereas the data is kept in the native database as it is. And the CUBiD, the private blockchain network, just kind of like talk to this native database as well as the public blockchain structure. So this is how kind of like the transactions would look like. Metadata, what we are saving in the public blockchain, the IPFS hash, and it doesn't need to be IPFS. I mean, if you another cloud storage and things like that, you put the link on it. The transaction, the block number, everything is kept, and so that everybody keeps the metadata. So the integrity is ensured as well as it is always in sync. So now I'll just show you some demo how the actually it works. So we used this Ganesh platform to build up the simulated environment. So this is the you can think it as a wallet where you have all the ethers and things like that. Then we can have the different tokens as well as the transaction, and we put the smart contract and the transaction the ID for the hash for this smart contract is there. And it just, the smart contract is that which attribute is required for which organization. And this is the 4 nodes. The 3 nodes are HMRC, Land Registry, and Companies House. And the 4th one is the notary, who does notarize the each transactions. So the 4 nodes are running on Corda environment. So now we just incorporate a new company. So this is the front end for the you can do for the Corda. So suppose it actually talking with the native database as well as with the Corda. So we just create a new company called a random company, and its incorporation number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So as you know, and as soon as it is created, both the land registry and the HMRC are being informed that the new company has been formed, and that is their incorporation number, and their database is updated. Their native database is updated, and this is the hash for that. So if you want to kind of store any type of attached data, say for example the incorporation certificate for that company, you can put any type of data, and that it's gone to the IPFS, and IPFS send back an hash for that. And we kind of put the whole metadata into the Ethereum. So it has, as I showed it before, that IPFS has transaction has block number, etc. Everything is gone. Everything is kind of informed, and the whole thing has been transmitted to the appropriate organization, land registry, and HMRC. So I'm talking from this Companies House point of view. So the Companies House has this type of form, and we just mimic that thing. And as you can see, as we increase, the first state was that company information, and the second state was attaching a document to that company. So let's talk about another company. It has a different number, 2020. So as you can see, this company has different information in different organizations, LR for land registry, HMRC, and CH for Companies House. So from Companies House, if they just kind of update the information, so they say that, okay, update the information according to my thing, so it will just update accordingly. So now everything is in sync in kind of like a synchronized manner, and you can change the information. They change the address from Landaf to Kincoin, it just change automatically. So now that say that if the turnover, say for example, say it is only visible to HMRC and companies, or not to land registry, because land registry is not interested about turnover. So, and it also can kind of dissolve. If the company is dissolved, it is dissolved from all databases, and they know that every state is consumed and things like that. So back to my presentation. So this is the native database. It's just a kind of simulated database. The thing is that every information, as it, whatever registered, whatever public service organization is updating, it get updated to the native database, and because they trust each other, there's no trust issue. So, and also it doesn't need to be they don't need to change their native database structure, because here you can see the red dot. This is coming from the Corda environment, and whereas the black circle is kind of their whatever field they have in things like that. So that kind of, we hope, will change, will not kind of like make them very much afraid that, oh, we have to change everything and things like that. They would not know that they are talking to blockchain structure. So it will be more like a stealth approach. You can think of it like that. Okay, so these are the different metadata we have been talking about, like this IPFS storage integrity that shows the integrity of it, the metadata hash that enables the immutability, the transaction hash, blockchain hash, block number, and etc. So these are the data that enables us to show that what are the kind of like produce the integrity as well as the immutability of the data. So also like because you have the IPFS hash or the cloud link, whatever, so if somebody wants to kind of like prove their identity or something like that, or validity of some certificate, they don't need to certificate. They only need this IPFS hash or the QR code for that. And the receiver, and whether it's a bank or not, they can kind of like without almost like a zero knowledge proof this. Okay, that's the authentic thing because this hash is from the company's house and things like that. They don't even need to see the certificate itself. Also, this is the important thing that if you see the explorer of the thing, that you know that all the state that this Bojo company has gone through. So first it was incorporated, then it changed address, then it said turnover and things like that. So this provenance information would give that how that the company was behaving and things like that. So like Hossein was saying that instead of Bitcoin, this is, if you see the company and if you link this company together, you can see what's the company kind of like activities were over the time and things like that. So this can, because everything is time stamped. So just from this information, if you put in the machine learning, you know the KYC, the economic thing, the law, I mean, what whether they're going through this, and that is important because this foreign registry kind of implication and this entity buying lands in London area, that is what important. This type of information is required and things like that. So yeah, this is our team. So Ali Shahaab is the, who actually did the work, is the PhD student, and me and Chaminda is the supervisor, and Ross is the company supervisor. And this work was funded by KES, PhD studentship, and also partly by the Welsh government. So lastly, I would like to introduce one of our center that we have just introduced, started to build in Cardiff Met, the Center for Industry 4.0 and Blockchain Research. So we have a multidisciplinary team. We have from all academics from like 4 different schools, and we have different expertise from economics, law, public health, crypto governance, and philosophy, management, and various ways. So we'd be very much interested to know about your, if you have any research thoughts and ideas and things like that, we would like to collaborate on that. So thank you very much for the Jack, Laura, and Bitcoin SV for giving us the opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks, Imtiaz. That's really, really interesting talk as well. I think there's an awful lot to digest. Then it's useful for us to see, going about it. Obviously, you guys using Ethereum, and how that differs from how we might think about tackling the same problem with BSV. And I think we'll get more into some of those questions later. And I'm sure George's talk next up will also address some kind of some different approaches. Just before we do move on to the next talk, so thank you, lots of you have been commenting on the page and joining. And I'm pleased to announce the winner of the second giveaway is the handle eJacker88. So well done. And we'll send you your prize in a moment. Don't worry if you did miss out this time. We'll hopefully be doing more of these in the future and future events. So it's still worth your while to join the Meetup page and get signed up in advance for that. But we'll also make sure to ping a few pennies around to everyone at the end who does comment their handle, just so we can introduce you to using BSV for some of these apps. But yeah, without further ado, I'd like to now introduce our third speaker, George Samuels, who again is talking about something that I think is of great interest to me personally as well, in kind of not just public service, but kind of almost a national service in this project. But I don't want to give anything away because I think George will have a much better way to put it than me. So I'd like to introduce George, and he can talk to you all about this very interesting project. So thank you, George.
Thank you very much, Jack. Hello, everybody. It's actually been very interesting listening in on the 2 previous presentations, the previous one actually being quite relevant to this one. So I'm going to be stepping back a little bit and going a little bit more big picture. And so if there are, of course, any other technical questions as we go through this, definitely feel free to ask those questions and might be able to also address them in the Q&A part. So yeah, in this session of mine, I've actually adopted or adapted this from another talk that I did for the BSV Tokyo guys on Saturday morning, 6 a.m. my time. So hopefully, you know, made it a little bit more relevant here because I had some Japanese references. And yeah, hopefully you don't see too many of those in this talk. But I'm going to be talking about, of course, you know, where in the world is Tuvalu, if you haven't heard of it before, why BSV and why Tuvalu specifically. The origin story of the project, some timelines, and then future opportunities and challenges. And finally, a Q&A. So yes, my name is George Siosi Samuels. I am the managing director for Faiā. Currently, we call ourselves a community tech consultancy. But some sort of interesting cultural background. You often hear me refer to culture and community in the context of tech projects. But my mother is Tuvalu and Samoan. That was sort of my in to this project. In the Pacific, it's very much kinship driven. Relationships are very important, very community driven. So it was a perfect matchup for our company and also this type of project. My father is Fijian Indian. So I was born in Suva, Fiji. I'm an Australian citizen, but have lived in South and Southeast Asia for many years. So I've definitely been sort of across the Asia Pacific area. Now, where is Tuvalu? So for those of you who do not know where Tuvalu is, it is based in the South Pacific, just off to the right of Papua New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand. You can see here, it's so small that it does require a star on it in order for you actually to see anything there. The yellow line is its exclusive economic zone. I won't go into too much of that in this talk, but it is something that ties into sort of our future plans around this project. And sort of untapped opportunities that nobody's really been looking at, but we have been, and hence why this project came to be. Tuvalu is made up of 8 islands. So these are the 8 islands, and on the Tuvaluan flag, you'll actually see 8 stars to represent these 8 islands. It is an atoll. This is actually a picture of a part of Tuvalu. If the image actually was a bit to the left, you can see ocean on both sides. It's that small. So, you know, when it comes to sort of rising sea levels, every inch counts for them. Because you can imagine if that road was completely covered by water, well, you know, people won't be able to drive back and forth between some of the islands. Now, Tuvalu's population is actually 11,646 as of 2019. Again, a very small population. But a very interesting thing about it is that although it's quite small, it is a UN-seeded nation. And it actually has a lot of sway in some of the geopolitics that takes place between China, Australia, and the US. Another interesting fact, they actually use the Australian dollar as their national currency in Tuvalu. They do have their own Tuvaluan currency, but only in the form of coins. So another unknown fact is that people actually buy, or at least globally, people do buy gold and silver coins from Tuvalu because they have a special minting arrangement between themselves and Australia. I don't think they're minting them anymore, but it was something that a lot of sort of coin collectors were interested in the past. In terms of their IT infrastructure, and I've included this because in our BSV Tokyo talk, people were interested in knowing more about sort of what is the IT infrastructure status in Tuvalu. And they are currently in the process of upgrading most of their mobile networks to 4G. So they do have 3G. Most people on the islands do have mobile phones and access to Facebook. And in our sort of work with the Tuvalu government, they have been, we've been able to have seamless Zoom calls with them. So I think the government house or government building there actually has, fast enough internet speeds to be able to do, remote work, etc. But what was interesting is that actually the Australians had the issues with their internet connection, which is ironic because they're supposed to be the more developed nation. Okay, looks like this hasn't popped up, so let me just quickly see what that is supposed to be. Okay, so I think the reason why this hasn't showed up is because Jack told me that animations don't work, and I think there was an animation on this slide. But luckily, this slide actually had to do with sort of the genetic origins of Tuvalu, which actually comes from East Asia. This was relevant to the Tokyo talk. Okay, so why blockchain for the nation of Tuvalu? So at a more sort of global political standpoint, Tuvalu right now is sort of at the forefront of rising sea levels. Regardless of, I guess, your belief on climate change, this is a big chunk of the issues that take up sort of the mind space of their government. However, why was the Tuvalu government interested in using blockchain, aka BSV, to leverage it at all? And it was because the main minister, who we are working directly with, I'll introduce him shortly, they're looking at alternative solutions to their climate change issues. At a national level, at a government level, often, especially for many of these Pacific islands and other island nations, the default is to sort of go into foreign aid and rely on help and support from larger nations. What I really like about Tuvalu and how they're seeing this is they're, one, seeking alternative solutions, but two, also really looking to push the edge of those solutions. And so there was an article that went out on Radio New Zealand called Tuvalu Government Seeking Immortality on the Blockchain. And this is because for Tuvalu, it's a very serious threat for them that if the islands disappear, what do they have left to sort of leave as a legacy of we were here? And so sort of immortalizing themselves on the blockchain is actually something that is a serious thing for them to consider. And so, you know, this made for a great headline, but I think it also touches on the fact that this is a very real thing for them. And it's almost Black Mirror-esque in terms of, you know, uploading, you know, data of your culture and your people onto a blockchain that, you know, hopefully will be around for the long run. And then on a very basic level, down below, lower right, you know, their needs are around mobile banking. So over the next 10 years, they are looking to undergo, you know, a digital transformation process. And part of that is, you know, moving towards less physical cash and paperless. So, you know, the mobile banking needs is very important. And this is sort of a good in for blockchain-based solutions. So why Bitcoin BSV? Okay, so this is more from the end for the Tuvalu government, right? Like, obviously there are a lot of blockchains out in the market right now, all competing for clients. But in this particular case, what actually helped was, from the technical standpoint, was two very simple things: scale and patents. The minister has a background in law himself, and so he actually, you know, was looking at this landscape and seeing just how much, you know, crypto pushes a lot of scams, etc. So he didn't want to get involved with a project where, you know, that is sort of what defines it. Even though, ironically, in terms of news about BSV, it's called a scam. He was looking at the more practical things in the back end. So this does include things like scale. So regardless of what's popular at the moment, including BTC, Ethereum, and many other blockchains, to date, BSV is the only one actually scaling on chain. Many other blockchains are looking at layer 2 solutions, et cetera, to scale, but BSV is actually able to scale on chain. And so there was a world record recently for a 638 megabyte block, which I believe is a world record. And you know, these are things that are just quietly happening in the background in terms of the entire crypto landscape. So yeah, what I really appreciate about the Tuvalu government is that, you know, they're looking at this very practically. The second bit is the patent side. So a lot of folks, especially on the consumer side, the average person does not really take into consideration the patent landscape. But for those who are involved with enterprise solutions, patents are a big deal. There's a lot of time, money, whether fortunate or unfortunate, that is put into sort of enforcing these patents across companies in the corporate landscape. And so one of our partners, which I'll talk about more soon, Enchain, they are one of the leading blockchain patent holders in the market outside of your major companies, like IBM, Alibaba, etc. So it's very fascinating to see a little, small, relatively unknown company have such a lead very early on. And Enchain indeed were one of the first to sort of start pushing out, patent applications. Fast forward about 2-3 years now, it's definitely a lot more competitive, but I think some of the more important patents are starting to be secured by Enchain. And this is what was also fascinating to the minister when he was looking at why BSV, compared to others. Because if Tuvalu is looking at immortalizing itself for the future, then this sort of gives a little bit more sense of security for the future. Especially, if there are other corporate interests coming from other major players, MasterCard, IBM, etc. So yeah, that's a relatively unknown area that people don't look at, but it exists. So why Tuvalu, and why is this relevant for BSV? So one of the major things is that this is, essentially for BSV, this is the first major government project that we have, and one with a lot of promise and opportunity. Now, I will talk about some of the sort of risks and challenges associated with, looking at, small island nations as an experiment, right? And this has to do with more of the local cultural things. But from a practical standpoint, this is a great way to showcase the power of Bitcoin as intended even just 10 years ago, and what it can do. In the Pacific, this isn't the first blockchain project. There have been others, I think on Ethereum, and also there was another one for the Marshall Islands called the Sovereign Coin. Unfortunately, that really was an ICO route that was pushed by an Israeli company, I think. And so with this project, we don't want it to be about that at all. We really do want to show beyond just sort of the payment functionality of a blockchain, what else can be done. And I think the previous presentation, touched on a few of the use cases. They are definitely relevant here. This was just a comment from the well-known Jimmy Nguyen from the Bitcoin Association when we released the news about this project. And it was a partnership between ourselves, Enchain Global, who enterprise-based solutions, and Elas Digital. Elas Digital is headed up by another great individual, Brendan Lee. And we are all working together because when putting this project together, I figured that it would be important for us to come together to help, I guess, push the use case of BSV and why it matters. So essentially, an attitude or a spirit of better together. Okay, so just the role of Faiā very quickly, because this was included in the last talk. For us, our role is really to be a bridge between communities and technology. I think there is a space for a lot of technology projects who sort of do not take into consideration the role of communities and culture when they're looking to roll out any tech. Many tech companies will often look at things, just putting the tech out there and things will just switch on by itself. But if the crypto landscape is anything to sort of watch, there are a lot of cultural elements at play that end up sort of showing unintended consequences. So we take a very different look at this landscape, and we talk a lot about the importance and role of culture and community in these adoption projects for especially blockchain. And working with the Tuvalu government, this is actually a very good use case because we're dealing with citizens, right? Civic engagement, and what we're doing has geopolitical consequences. So this isn't just a technology project. This is much more for the nation of Tuvalu. So again, just talking about communities and technology, we sit in sort of the middle. And so what we're doing is we're playing a role in being able to translate a lot of the complicated tech aspects around blockchain and Bitcoin SV to the government and itself. And also starting to do that with the citizens too. because communication and storytelling is very important. And I think in this landscape, you can see how essentially outside of our technology focus, there's actually a lot of people who know how to tell good stories, and sometimes those stories, even if untrue, they can actually guarantee success, or at least help with the success of those projects. So it's something we've looked at from day one. And these are just 3 of the main services we're providing in this project. Enchain and ELAS are looking very much at the technical implementation. So our company, we're very familiar with the technicals, and we are translating a lot of that for Tuvalu. Okay, so how did this project begin? So actually, the origins for this project was a Medium article, believe it or not, called A 5-Point Plan to Future-Proofing Tuvalu, the sinking nation. Now, I put the sinking nation in quotes because it's not necessarily a thing I like to lead with, but unfortunately, it's what a lot of people understand or think about. But this whole project is actually about helping to shift the narrative for a nation like Tuvalu from being a sinking nation, which puts them in sort of a helpless victim sort of position in terms of how the West perceives, and then moving towards these sort of unique solutions with blockchain implementation to help start pushing them and their own people towards thinking about things differently. So as mentioned, right, this isn't just a technology project. It is actually something that has an impact both for current and future generations, because it opens up new pathways, not just from a data standpoint, but also for the locals to see new ways of earning revenue and new ways of learning and earning online. So this is the actual 5-point plan. The slides have cut it out here, which is okay, because I'll just read it to you. Okay, so the 5-point plan essentially is 1, open .tv to a bidding war. So the article actually talked about .tv. So you may or may not know, but Tuvalu owns the .tv top-level domain. And so they, every number of years, they actually renew licenses with other companies. And to date, I do not believe that they have actually done a bidding war. So by doing this, my suggestion was that they'd be able to get a much better or much more accurate valuation of .tv in the global market, instead of just doing the one-to-one relationships, whereby essentially they've been taken advantage of, right? They haven't really gotten the best deal for .tv. So by doing this, you get to see the open market price, how much people are willing to pay. If you've been watching NFTs, you can see people will pay ridiculous amounts of money for nothing, and then sort of use that to be able to funnel it back into the government's efforts to improve themselves and not have to rely on foreign aid. The next bit is run a nationwide digital transformation program. 3, improve the internet infrastructure. And then 4 was what I had there was a go cashless or paper-less, because we can't really remove cash, but we can remove or reduce the amount of paper that is used. And that was actually where I suggested or expanded on using blockchain or BSV to assist with that. And then the 5th part was actually then using the money that they're getting to secure physical land for themselves in other parts of the world. Because again, looking at it as sort of a cultural insurance, this is a big part for them. They are dealing with the possibility of becoming extinct as for land, something that not a lot of other people or nations have to think about. But this is a very real threat for them. And I see some of the questions there, which is great. So hopefully we can get to that later. So this is Simon Kofe. He is the minister that we are dealing with. He is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Justice, and Communications. And I mean, this guy is a trailblazer in my eyes, and a visionary. This picture is here with the president, the leader for Taiwan. And another unknown fact, Tuvalu is one of now 4 nations, I believe, that are still allies with Taiwan. Unfortunately, many other islands are flipping over to China. And this is a big issue in the Pacific in terms of sort of the economic debt politics that is being pursued by China. And talking about sort of the trailblazing side of things, Simon Kofe is known for rejecting China's offer of around $400 million to create floating cities. So the concept has been floated around, pun intended, to actually create floating cities, just like Dubai has, off its coast. And because, the nation of Tuvalu, they have a very, strong culture, rich heritage that they want to preserve. China had offered $400 million, but Simon Kofe pretty much said no, because he knows that the Chinese often use debt politics to, push their own agenda, right? By doing this, they then essentially lock the country into being used as military bases, etc. So, this is also a thorn in China's side, right? Because of their sort of strong alliance with Taiwan. So again, what I'm reiterating, right, is that this isn't just a technology project for us. This has very serious geopolitical ramifications, depending on what we end up doing. So here is just some pictures of some of the floating city concepts that have been going around. In French Polynesia, I think they almost went through with it, but then the locals actually pushed back because they felt that it was just another way for rich men to find a tax haven off of the Pacific. And it didn't actually really benefit the locals. So those are important things to look at. And yes, in December of 2020, that's when we had started this project, or at least announced that we were about to start with nChain, ELAS, and Faiā. Now, of course, we are getting towards the end because I know we've got another half-hour section. These are just some of the comments from the people themselves, the Tuvaluans. Some are generally excited. Actually, most are generally excited about this. They really love the idea of leveraging blockchain, even if not many of them know what it's about yet. But we're going to be helping to explain that over time. It's generally been positive. Some of the more negative criticisms have been about why does Tuvalu need this now? There are many other things that we are more concerned with. Why don't we just focus on national commerce? And what's interesting is that I guess if you don't understand what we're doing, using BSV is actually going to help increase sort of the commerce for the nation. And it is a long-term project, because this blockchain project is one of many other projects happening at the government level. We are complementing other things that deal with improving the general commerce and e-commerce for the nation. Blockchain, this particular project, we're looking to help with the digital infrastructure to actually open up more revenue opportunities in the future. So what's next? So Tuvalu, they, as mentioned before, right, they are moving towards paperless, so using less paper. So this is going to be something that's a real sort of change management project in getting sort of people to understand why this would be more important. We have many nations that we have learned from Singapore to many other small nations that have already successfully kind of done this. And so remembering, right, that Australia, the Australian currency is actually primarily used. This is something that we have to take into account. So removing the Australian dollar from the equation may have some geopolitical ramifications. So we can't just simply take that out and put in some new digital currency called the Tuvalu digital dollar. And so if you look at what we've been exploring, we've of course been exploring the possibility of making Bitcoin, BSV, a legal tender for the nation. So that is a possibility. But based on sort of what we've already been learning from the citizens and the government themselves, I think the timing is not necessarily right. In change management, you often look at sort of how ready a group is, their change readiness, right, to adopt new things. And we don't believe at this point in time that they're ready for this sort of leap in terms of using Bitcoin as the main currency. However, this is where sort of thinking about this and what we're seeing with the central bank digital currencies around the world, this is a sort of good transition step. So there is the possibility, of course, for Tuvalu to take its currency supply and create their own digital currency this way through a CBDC route, but all built on BSV, which we know is definitely doable. And so this route would allow us to deal with sort of the behavioral things on the ground, but also still be able to have transactions off of a BSV ledger with all the scalability that comes with it. This would also help deal with any sort of issues around, general adoption of cryptocurrencies and things. And I think a lot of people still think that this is a cryptocurrency that we're trying to build, but that's not how we're approaching this. We definitely don't want this to be associated with some of the ways in which other projects in the Pacific have been dealt with to date. So timeline, we have 3 phases. As you can see, there's some Japanese in here. We're just finishing up phase 1, which has been all about the discovery and making sure we're doing our due diligence for the government themselves. You can't just go in with a solution at first. You really have to make sure that you do your research and work well with the government to ensure that this indeed is a solution that's needed for them. Luckily, it's looking good. And phase 2 then would be the execution. So we're looking at that over the next couple of years. But phase 3 is more about sort of cementing a lot of the behavior change aspects. And that it falls in line with the 10-year outlook that Tuvalu has for its entire digital transformation process. So there's those 3 phases, and that's what we're, I guess, able to share for now. Some challenges. And we're getting close to the end. So I talked about before sort of how some of the locals, do have some criticisms, of course. One of them is actually what I've heard a lot used in the Pacific region is techno-capitalism and blockchain imperialism. If you've never heard of this before, now you have. And it's a very real blocker in the Pacific. And this is because of the history of the Pacific itself, right? Many of the island nations have been colonized, by Europeans. And so there's a bit of this wanting to embrace what the West has to offer, but also a bit of this, sort of background and understanding and awareness of sort of the colonial approach to even technology. Because at the beginning of this talk, I talked about, ensuring that the way that we're approaching this is not just about a technology experiment for a country that's small enough for us to do it on, but actually looking at this as, okay, how can we genuinely help the locals and the nation itself to leverage this technology for their own benefits, to help them become more self-sufficient, rely less on foreign aid, etc. So this is actually a thing for us to look at it and ensure that we're addressing as we're doing the project. The other concern is the Bitcoin energy consumption. Bitcoin energy consumption is something that is not just unique to Tuvalu. You might have been seeing these headlines across most news networks at the moment, and I think it's very convenient because it's a way of, I guess, suppressing the adoptions of these type of technologies. But again, Tuvalu has been kind of at the forefront of climate change and rising sea level discussions. So for some people, it seems ironic that we're utilizing a technology that apparently contributes to the same issues. But that's going to be a topic for another discussion. We have actually sorted this out in terms of the understanding for the nation of Tuvalu. And we essentially say it's not necessarily how much energy is being consumed, but from where the energy is coming from. And that's actually some of the opportunities we see in the Pacific. And then, of course, we've got the geopolitics and the debt politics coming in from China, which is one of the biggest challenges and a very real challenge. Okay, opportunities. We're talking before, right, about some of the opportunities in the Pacific. Not going to be able to share all of that just yet, but in terms of where I can put your eyes towards, things around green energy and supply chain management. There are some companies in the BSV space like Unisat who are looking at this already. But those are definitely 2 areas that we have our sights on, and how we see what we're doing contributing to some of these solutions. Because if you just think about Tuvalu, right, its biggest threat is the ocean, but we believe also that its biggest asset is the ocean. So something to think about. The second opportunity has to do with sort of big data, but actually something we're calling big cultural data, so BCDs. And the reason for this is because with the big data that comes with Bitcoin transactions, obviously you can do a lot with it, especially if it's on a public ledger. But where we see sort of this unique intersection is on the cultural side. And from the cultural side, what I'm referring to is actually what we're witnessing with the whole sort of NFT craze right now. And if there's anything that you can learn from what's happening in the world, being fun And creatives seem to be a lot more important in terms of this current generation's values and what they're willing to pay money for than utility. And we see this especially in the arts and the creative space, right? We know that when it comes to art, it's very subjective and people are more than willing to pay lots of money for it. But on a more practical sense, taking it just away from just the fun aspect, here in Tuvalu, there is actually a lot of things that are very important to them that they can not only use as a way to preserve their culture, but actually hold ownership of it and have other people potentially, trade on. All right. So this opens up new markets for these particular use cases, right? And this could be applied to many remote cultures and communities around the world. So on the lower left, got oral traditions, expression and language, performing arts, social practice, rituals and festive events, knowledge and practices, traditional craftsmanship, and food heritage. The United Nations has a term for this. It's called intangible cultural heritage. And we see a big intersection between this sort of space and also blockchain. So again, something that people haven't been thinking about, but I think there's a massive opportunity and why we're particularly excited about the NFT space, because regardless of the tech messiness right now and the legal messiness, I think culturally it's speaking the right language to what we're seeing or what we saw with Tuvalu and the Pacific as well. And Dioch, thank you. And I will hand it over back to Jack now.
Thanks very much, George. I appreciate you're the first person to have put some Welsh in the end of your slide. So, Dioch yn fawr iawn to you as well. I think I'd quite like to go straight to questions now for the end, actually, the final session. So if Hossein and Imtiaz, if you'd like to rejoin us and put your cameras back on for the kind of roundtable discussion, and I'll also remove the slides. I don't think we need these anymore. So I found some, lots of common threads, I think, through a lot of your talks. Obviously, in all cases, we're talking about using public ledgers for some kind of thing. It struck me, you mentioned, George, about this not just being a technology project, as you said, and I also got that impression from your talk, Imtiaz. I would say, is this something you'd agree with, in that the blockchain is forming a part of a solution, but actually it's not really something to be treated as a magic bullet, and maybe there's lots of other things, as you showed in yours. Is that something you kind of found in your work?
Imtiaz?
Yeah, it's a part of the solution, and especially we want to create a different layer, because we do not want to kind of part of the existing culture and the data management system, because it's not only for public services, but also for many organizations. When you say that you need to change the whole system, you need to go to the staff needs to go to training and stuff like that. So it creates it's a bottleneck for the adaptation of the new technology. But if you kind of covertly introduce the system where they are in their natural kind of environment, not too much. They just have to go undergo some training and stuff like that. But behind the screen, everything will be automatized, and the technology they will get the benefit of the technology. So that was the kind of the philosophy behind it. And actually, this philosophy was Estonia. Introduced this philosophy. So they are, from 90s, they introduced this X road. Unfortunately, it was become, somehow related to a Silk Road later. But they're this connecting all databases of public services. And once the blockchain was introduced in 2009 or something like that, they introduced blockchain as a separate layer that connects, especially because of the immutability and stuff like that. So it's a different layer that we want to kind of integrate with the current existing system.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And also, I think, just a lot of the hype that surrounded blockchain in the past as something you can just, throw out as a problem is not quite true. Like even in supply chain, we see part of the problem is about, bringing the right people into the right room and getting them to cooperate more than anything.
Yeah.
Hossein as well, I wondered if you would you agree with this? Because I know you mentioned, and we had a question actually about when you talked about, Lu Xuan in the chat said, how do you identify that these addresses belong to the same entity? And is that something that would involve kind of other third-party sources? Because I'm aware of some kind of more high-profile cases in the past. Companies like Chainalysis have kind of collaborated with law enforcement to kind of fight crime using blockchain. So would you agree that with that sentiment as well, that kind of you can combine the raw data with other sources to get a bit of a richer picture?
Yeah. So the question that was asked was how do I identify that they belong to the same entity? I first would answer that, and then I will say how we link it to other to known entity. So in Bitcoin protocol, every entity or every address that enters into the input part of a transaction belongs to the same entity, because you need to have the same private key to sign the transaction. So we can say all of these belong to the same entity. If you put all the inputs that they go into one transaction, for example, if input A and B are in one transaction, and also the B and C are also input in another transaction, you can say A, B, and C belong to the same entity. They call it union find algorithm. That is how we do it for all the transactions in the network. And we identify around 350 million wallets or entities, with the biggest one being Huobi, that has around 20 million addresses. That's how we identify them, and we categorize them as same entity. But how we identify them, there are many services out there, like one that Jack mentioned, Chainalysis, or other websites and services that they identify the addresses that are used. So you can see literally live that this amount of Bitcoin is going from this entity to that entity. And you can simply store those names and link them to the addresses and the wallets that you have. Because if you know that address belongs to an entity, it means all the addresses that they belong to the same entity, you can say they belong to the same person. That is how we do it. But before doing that, can I just, because there was a question about sharing the slides, I don't mind if anyone wants to have the slides, and I think the event is also recorded, so I'm more than happy if anyone wants to have the slides.
Yeah, we'll make sure we get a distribution out of them then to anyone who's interested. If you are interested, just make sure you contact Hossein or myself after. We also had one question, and again, this is because this is BSV Wales. We have a specific focus on what we can do in Wales, and something we often say is Wales is kind of like its own little island nation within the UK. So George, this question came in. What Wales may be bigger in population than Tuvalu, but we're still a small country in some respects. Does George have any recommendations for how Wales should go about embracing blockchain tech? What sort of size advantages Wales should be looking to leverage?
Yeah, interesting question. I would need to understand a little bit more about sort of what the situation is for you guys right now. Like in terms of blockchain tech, is government currently exploring anything formally?
I'm not entirely sure myself, but I get the impression that it's something that, similar to AI, Wales has a very strong fintech and AI community. And I think that's kind of a natural progression. So it's something that is on the radar for sure.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of, as Imtiaz mentioned, we have lots of public services aspects like HMRC and Companies House who live in or operate out of the UK, out of Wales.
Yeah, I think one of the things, again, I guess stuff people are not looking at is, believe it or not, relationships. If you look at sort of how a lot of blockchain solutions are making it into government, it's because of people who know people, right? I mean, I look even Australia. You've got very big BTC fanboys, Lightning Networks, right? And because they're already in there, they can make those pitches and those positions. The difference now, and this kind of relates to the first question, is that we're dealing with infrastructure level stuff. So when it comes to blockchain, the way that we think about it, it is just, one, it could be seen as a glorified database, but two, Bitcoin takes the blockchain concept and does a lot more with it, right? And then that is just a plumbing system. So when we went in, we also didn't lead with, BSV is the greatest or any of this sort of stuff. We had to look at, what are the facts, what is going to provide some long-term sustainability. And that came with, the scale and the patent side of things. But just looking at that, if we're looking at it just as a plumbing system, then everything else is actually going to become even more important, because that's the visual interface, right, for government, because they're not the experts on blockchain systems. And so it's very easy for them to end up not really know what they're getting into. So we spent about 9 months before we signed off on anything, actually like explaining and educating as much as possible to them. But for the average citizen, they're going to be more concerned of just the user interface aspect, right? So this is why I do like what's happening in the NFT space, right? Because in NFTs, people are just doing it for fun, but they're asking the right questions now because they're realizing, wait, am I actually owning the original thing? It looks like when they dig in a little bit, they're wanting to dig in, that it's actually just references to something that's stored somewhere else. So they've just purchased a receipt or a certificate of authenticity. And so when they start asking this, I think it does start to come then to, okay, actually, which blockchain solutions are doing this better? And I'm hoping that, with certain blockchain providers, that this becomes more self-explanatory in the long run from an infrastructure level.
For sure. We've also had a really interesting question that I think is kind of hits the nail on the head from John Barker. And maybe I think Imtiaz and Hossein also, you might be well placed, working in universities, but collaborating with some of these kind of public sector entities. Sorry, it's okay. Is there kind of a risk of, well, the question says, are they taking these DLT, distributed ledger technology solutions, into other areas of public service, or are they stuck in perpetual pilot phase? And one interesting thing I'd also like to kind of highlight is that I think we've seen quite a boom of proof of concepts or pilot phases for permission systems, particularly things like Hyperledger. But now, Imtiaz, you mentioned you were using Ethereum for your metadata immutability. So could you maybe give us an insight into what the situation is there? Are you is there a risk of being in this kind of piloting hell, or do you see more progress there? And also maybe you could ask, maybe you could just mention, why did you choose Ethereum in particular for the immutable data? Is this something you could achieve with a private ledger as well, or is this something you can only do with a public system?
So, the first question, what are the difficulties on whether it will remain as a pilot project? So, although like Wales is a nationwide, only 3 million people or something like that, right? But the technology we are using here is old, right? We are using, heredity. We inherited, old technologies. Whether it's a phone booth to kind of like everything, right? So that it's not a new nation, right? It's a small nation, but not a new nation. So adaptation of technology doesn't happen overnight. Say, for example, just to give you an example, in Companies House, there is a law that all company-related data needs to be archived in this premises. Like, it's an industrial age concept when everything was paper-based, right? So what it means that it is in the Cardiff office, right? They cannot even put the data into the cloud, right? In this age. So they have to change the law. So there are many laws. Most of the laws are industrial age based and mindset based. So you have to go through the loops of the these laws and regulations, as well as this GDPR issues is coming, right? Say, for example, we had a paper, and it's a big issue because the Companies House, there's a litigation about gender change, right? So if a person, a company director, change his or her gender, right? It has a tax implication, it has an entitlement implication, and a lot of other implication in terms of laws, right? And if you put this thing in blockchain, right? So you would know that this person was different gender like 2 years before or 3 years before and things like that. That contravenes with GDPR issues, right? So it is not only technology, but other various regulations, and many of them are derived from industrial age mindset and scenario that needs to be changed first. And changing law is very difficult in a democratic society, right? It opens up a lot of discussion, debate, and stuff like that. So it will take time, right? But once you can show that the benefit of it, and especially countries like Estonia, Malta, they are benefiting from it, right? you can show the benefit of it, and that will slow adaptation, but it will not happen overnight.
Yeah, I guess you also, outcomes are important to show. So in these proof of concepts, you have to show some genuine value that's being delivered from them, and outcomes is a good way. There was one question I also wanted. I think we've got time for maybe two more, and this one was put to Hossein about. You said, Omar Rana says, is your database, so CUBiD, is the database centralized? Is the idea then to centralize all blockchain database and generate queries on this data? And I guess this is maybe a chance for you to comment on, we talk a lot about distributed or decentralized databases. So then, is there an issue with then having a central one that you run, or can you leverage it? And do we have to trust you?
It's a very difficult and easy question to answer. So the difficult part is that we are talking about blockchain and distributed databases. I'm not trying to undermine that concept or go against it. But the thing is, as academics, the reason that I created CUBiD was because as academics, we are used to working with the structured data, the Bitcoin data that is out there. You need to either be a good programmer or have lots of expertise to get it, interpret it, parse it, and put it in a structured format. The goal of the CUBiD is just to create a structured database in a centralized place. Yes, it is a centralized platform technically. There is a website for CUBiD that would be launched very soon, that you can go there and download the data in a structured format and query the centralized database. That was the whole idea of the CUBiD, because the thing is, blockchain still has huge amount of potential and huge amount of space for more research. Many academics, especially in business schools, they require the data to be in this format to be able to do the research on it and help to solve many of the questions and problems that we are facing. So that was the reason behind it, and that's the reason. Yes, it is a centralized database, but it is not against the distributed nature of the blockchain.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. And I would also just add, my personal kind of take on that as well, having looked into CUBiD, is that you're reducing the barrier to entry for research on this valuable data. But that's the kind of amazing thing about using Bitcoin data in the first place, is that you can't really fake that. No one has to trust you, and I think that plays into this whole conversation about public services. Bitcoin isn't necessarily about replacing all the centralized services. It can often be about just improving them, so making these kind of hybrid systems that, like Imtiaz showed. I'd like to just maybe finish on one question of my own, actually, selfishly. So George, you mentioned in terms of why the Tuvalu project used BSV, or was using BSV, and you mentioned scale as one of the key factors there. Does that word scale? Because when I think about these things, I think, well, if you have large volumes of data, then the cost associated with putting that on chain is going to be important. So when you say scale, does that also mean kind of efficiency and how much it costs to use? And I guess, as maybe I'd like Imtiaz to also come in afterwards about your choice to use Ethereum. Does that impact the efficiency of what you do? Would it be applicable for kind of larger scale things, or would you maybe be looking at using more cheaper systems? So maybe George, if you want to come in first.
Yep. I think, one of the interesting things is, like, over the last couple of years, we've had many conversations with enterprise players too, where, especially around the Hyperledger and use of Ethereum, right? So I think somebody was talking about this perpetual pilot phase, right? It's very real. Everybody hears the news about these pilot phases, and they're going to use a particular blockchain or project or whatnot, and then in the background, they just kind of like fall away into the background because they realize they hit a wall or a ceiling. In terms of their ability to do what they wanted to. And so after sort of observing that and learning about this, we were like, okay, this scale thing is a big deal, right? And it is something that is going to matter because, again, you're looking at infrastructure, right? And if you think about infrastructure projects in general, right? Say you're building a new sort of subway system. Nobody can use that thing until it's done, right? Nobody really sees the benefit, and it's a promise until it happens. And we sort of see the same thing happening in this space. And we look at our sort of time frame or timeline is 30 years, because throughout history, any sort of significant technological innovation has taken human beings around 30 years to even get used to the idea. So I think right now, I mean, you think about the internet. All the current big players were not even around at the beginning, and we're only 10 years in my opinion, from when Bitcoin came out and blockchain even became a thing. But even blockchain itself, we kind of think that it definitely isn't the solution to everything. It's great marketing, but the reality is blockchain does need to be used with other things, and that's why I particularly think that Bitcoin is a great use of that for what it is intended to do at a large scale without sort of those block limitations. We know the history of Ethereum. It should have been on Bitcoin as well, but it isn't. So it's actually also missing something that they are discovering in terms of these high gas fees and these limitations in their ability to scale. I know they're looking at stuff, but that's kind of what we've been seeing. Don't get me wrong, I love what the Ethereum guys are doing. They got a great developer community. But again, we're looking at infrastructure, and it's like if you have a hole in your plumbing system, a lot of the water for your house is just going to be leaking out or get clogged, right?
Okay. So do you have a minute for Ethereum? Okay. So we needed a public blockchain structure to put our transaction history as well as to immutable public blockchain structure. So why Ethereum? Because Ethereum also enables this to put smart contract with it, and because the smart contract was needed because different organizations like land registry and companies house, they only want to share particular attributes like an address or company name and stuff like that. Whereas with HMRC and companies house, there are different attributes. So these attributes and also this sharing of attributes also differ, and it's dynamic. I mean, depending on the situation and stuff like that, right? So that's why the smart contract would enable us to do that, and that's why the Ethereum is there. And Corda is there because as a kind of private blockchain structure, because not Hyperledger or other stuff, because it can talk to node, not the broadcasting the whole transaction to every node, things like that. So these are the different issues. In terms of scalability, I mean, we haven't we have thought about it because from companies' house perspective, I mean, not many companies are formed every day or something like that. So transaction is not that much issue. But when it comes to HMRC, man, things might change. But we hope that I mean, Ethereum, this model could be scalable, even with the Ethereum.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you made about using smart contracts and how much you want to be validated at the base layer, the base blockchain, I guess. And I think a common theme is, as you presented, like having an on-chain and off-chain component of these systems is kind of always inevitable for, whether it be GDPR reasons or scalability or, just cost. So there's lots of different trade-offs at play. And I guess, as you say, there's not necessarily tons and tons of companies being formed every day to record the data about, but for other use cases like healthcare, I guess that would be one where the scalability issues kind of rear their heads more. George, do you want to come back on something?
Yeah, just a question, right? So are you talking about the ability to do smart contracts or the ease of doing smart contracts currently?
Sorry.
So this is for,
sorry, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, I mean, ease of doing smart contract.
Okay.
On Ethereum structure, and kind of integrate with putting it in with Corda. So
yep, I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. On the BSV side, smart contracts can be done, and we are doing that for our project. But I know in terms of say onboarding new team members and things, Ethereum also has a sort of different way of thinking about it in terms of state machines. I mean, the states, and so people coming into Bitcoin and having to learn sort of the fundamental ways in which Bitcoin does, its smart contracts. That is a barrier, and also the front end user interfaces aren't as good as the Ethereum for sure.
Yeah, and also we have to connect it with the Corda, I mean, the private blockchain structure.
Yep, understood.
Yeah, I definitely think the maturity of that ecosystem is a good reason for why that decision is made in a lot of cases. And also when we use the term smart contract, that's a difficult one because it means lots of different things now. It's become like the word blockchain. It means 1,000 different things now. But unfortunately, I don't want to take up too much of anyone's time. And if we start going down that alley, I'm sure we will. So yeah, I really want to say thanks to all my guests for joining us. I really enjoyed all three presentations. I learned lots from each of them. And thanks for your time. And thanks for everyone who attended. I know I picked the nicest day of the year so far in the UK at least. So thank you very much for everyone who's here and not out in their gardens enjoying some more freedom. So before you go, I'd just like, so thank you again. And we will be having our Q2 event in a couple of months' time. So the date is not quite set yet, but if you join up on our Meetup page, you'll be able to get early notice about when that is, and make sure you attend next time. But yeah, thank you very much again to everyone. Thank you so much to my speakers. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be able to distribute the recording of this in the near future. Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.